Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Why don't you write when you don't need money, honey? That would certainly make a hit.
Welcome, everybody, to a very special episode of Word Docs. I almost said the name of our show wrong, which is unfortunate because this is our very first attempt at a live episode. We are doing this live as a special guest lectureship for one of my subjects with Dr. Amy T. Matthews.
Hello. We should call it a lecturesode.
A lecturesode. And Dr. Alex Vickery Howe. Again,
He always forgets my name. He always forgets my name.
And none of our listeners know that because I always edit that moment out. The topic of conversation today is editing and publishing. My students in this class already know everything I've got to say about editing and publishing. And so I have a list of questions for these wonderful people, my good friends and excellent colleagues. Are you ready, guys?
We're ready.
I think so. I'm feeling a little nervous, but yep.
Amy has to go first every time. That's a rule that I just made up.
Says who?
Says me.
Are you the boss of Amy, Alex?
No, not even close.
No, that's true. Okay, so Amy.
Haha, see, it works.
So, Alex, have you ever been in a position where you've been editing somebody else's work apart from students? Amy's has an editorial hat. Have you?
I have a sort of unofficial dramaturgical hat, which is other playwrights. Usually, if they're having trouble with their actual dramaturgs, might come to me and go, "Can you give some feedback on this?" Or actually, people who are doing PhDs in other institutions often come to me. I'm a good sounding board, but only again with people I really trust, because I never want to sully a relationship by giving unsolicited feedback or going too far with, who's someone who doesn't know my sense of humour. Or it's why I've always been really wary about collaborations, but with people I know well and like, I'm almost more likely to collaborate with someone I've just met, than risk a long-term friendship, I think.
It is a really tricky thing, I think, feedback, isn't it? It's hard. Yeah, it's a really careful line to walk, how you give feedback.
Do you have any tips on how to do that? Amy, for instance, working on Wakefield Press anthologies and stuff, you must have been editing people you knew.
Yeah.
I imagine.
I did have one interesting experience once with someone who, it was a story issue, it was a structural problem with the story, but when we sent her the feedback, same kind of wording as everyone else, she complained about us saying that we were censoring her and that it was political, which if she knew any of us, there's no way that we would politically have censored her. But yeah, because people, it really comes down to the person receiving the feedback and how resilient they are, because you all know as artists that 99% of the time you have the right to say yes or no. To say, no, I don't want to do it that way for these reasons. And then the publisher or editor will, if they're a good one, they say, oh, well, okay, fine, but it's not clear to me what's happening, or you need to find another way to get this clear to me, or they'll let you do what you want, basically, because it's your work. But I think people who are a little bit insecure or haven't practiced it have a very strong emotional response and want to lash out at you like you're an authority figure, when actually your role there is to help them make their work as the best it can be. And I think, but that's why I say to my PhD students all the time, is it's part of doing a PhD is an emotional resilience journey. It's about how to learn, how to take on, how to divorce your ego from the work so that people can give feedback to the work and you don't get mortally offended.
Yeah, and that political response is quite common. People that go, I'm being oppressed.
Yeah.
It's because of this or this. And you go, no, it's really not.
I had a copy editor on one of the Westerns, and I can't remember which one now, maybe the third one. And she was just super... I feel like she was on the spectrum or something, because she was just very blunt in ways that were a little bit inappropriate in her track changes comments. And it was just, but I just laughed in the end because I was like, clearly this is her, this is not me. But
yes,
you have to make that differentiation. Like when people give you feedback, you're like, well, they're coming from a position. I know what position I'm coming from. How do I evaluate this? What do I want to agree with? If I don't agree with it, I think I need a pretty good reason why I don't agree with it, not just you're wrong.
And if you don't agree with their solution, but you agree there might be a problem, the onus is on you to find a different solution. Yeah.
My supervisor said one of the first plays I wrote was fantastic. We had all the cast, the director, everyone in the room giving feedback. And then as we walked out the room, my supervisor, who was also the dramaturg, and she was this brilliant human being, and she just said, now ignore everything they just said. None of that's valuable. And we just went like an hour and a half listening to everyone's grievances. And she said, yes, the actors want more lines. That's because they're actors. The director wants this because it will be easier. They all have an agenda. She said, only ever look at when they're correlating around the same moment or the same scene. And then do not listen to their solutions. Just go, okay, there's something there that's not working. That is all you take away from, otherwise you have...
That's where you get those projects that don't work because they're clearly designed by committee, right? We all have seen those films, those TV shows.
Too many of them. One of the best pieces of advice I ever heard about being edited was that when you receive your feedback from your editor, never respond or do anything immediately. Always take 24 hours to get that rage and hurt and sense of betrayal and despair out of your system, and then you'll start to see solutions and you'll be able to communicate like an adult human being instead of a child.
My PhD student supervisor said something similar. He said 2 weeks, that when I give you feedback, I want you to sit with it for 2 weeks before you touch the document or respond to me. So we'd have a meeting here, and then 2 weeks later we'd have a meeting, and I was expected to go away and feel all that hurt and rage and frustration that you feel when someone critiques you. But he said basically because your immediate reactions will be knee-jerk, one way or the other, because I have had students where I say the same thing and they'll have gone and cut whole sections. I'm like, don't do that, because you've got to come back in a week and you'll think something. And you only notice the negative comments in the first instance.
Yes.
And it takes reading comments a few times before you start to see all the positives underneath that, because we have a negative bias, right, towards commentary. But then what would happen was sometimes I'd go back, well, this happens with editors now, where I'll make my point and I go back after a couple of weeks and they go, actually, you're right, don't do anything there. And it's like, I see if I'd gone away and cut all that or done something, you just needed to give them a chance. I had this recently I did a book pitch, you guys know about this, and I had to write the first 3 chapters, and she was I've got a frame narrative, so like bookended prologue and epilogue basically, and she was like, I'm just not sure that you need that. And I was like, oh no, I do, because there's a payoff coming. And then I was like, why don't I just write the last chapter and show you, because I don't think I can explain it. And so I did that. And then she was like, oh, yeah, totally, you need it. And it's like, okay, so sometimes it's about how you haven't communicated properly with your editor.
Yeah, payoffs is a big thing, actually. I find that a lot. People say, cut that, get rid of that. I go, no, if I cut or get rid of that,
that's not going to work.
I can't actually tell the story. Like that kills everything.
And I do twisty plots. I think you do too. So you really need to set up all those twists.
Yeah, it's like you need that. If you take that away from me, yes, I can convince you now that we should keep going and continue. But later on, we're going to kick each other for doing that. The other thing, just circling back to something you just said, Amy, the best editors and the best dramaturgs and the best whatever, sounding boards, are the ones that actually make you excited.
Yeah.
And I've had some really good meetings with people where they've been reasonably critical, but in a way that they're just asking questions or they're opening possibilities. So I leave that meeting going, awesome, I can't wait to get back to it.
Yeah.
But equally, I've had meetings with people who just bring out the red pen and treat you like an idiot.
Yeah.
And it's very hard not to be knee-jerk in that situation, because you go, you've made this personal now. You've actually gone an extra step.
I think there's often a question of scale in industries. Sorry to cut you off. Did I cut you off?
No, that was
terrible
basically
at
it.
that.
I was just breathing. It's fine.
Just kick me under the screen, Alex. No, I was thinking about scale because I was thinking about the difference between working with a smaller cottage publisher, like a little Adelaide publisher, versus working with the big multinationals. And again, there's a difference in scale between Australia, New Zealand and the US, in that in the smaller ones, that one person's doing everything. You're dealing with someone who is going to be your publisher, your story editor, and probably going to do a kind of structural and copy edit before they get to a smaller copy edit. And then in Australia, your publisher and your main editor might be the same. But in the US, I have a publisher who does that excited stuff and does the big story stuff, and she won't even touch the more nitty-gritty stuff. And she keeps me excited. And then you get the red pen brigade, and there's multiples of them. Like there might be 4 different layers of edits, and they come in and just really go. Meanwhile, she's my cheer squad the whole time, keeping me going. And I wonder if there's like once you can afford to have that, that's the better system. Is to
the
always
good cop, bad cop kind of. No, that makes sense, I think. But it's also, there is an art, I think, to giving feedback in such a way that it inspires confidence versus, and I have to be very careful, particularly with undergrads, how I do this. Another supervisor of mine said there's a difference between a teacher who says you'll never make it and a teacher who says you haven't made it yet, but you're on the right track. And I think it's similar with editing. It's a difference between saying can't say the word, you're very bad, versus saying, you know what, this story's got a lot of potential. We're not there yet. Let's get there together. And I guess at the other side of the coin is the really negligent, lazy editor who says, this is great. Yeah. Go for it. I mean, that's negligent, really. And as a teacher, that's negligent. You're the king of the world. First year, like that's negligent because it's setting someone up for a fall.
Yes, I'm still learning how to balance the feedback to students. So apologies to any students who feel like I'm being too negative by picking on all your semicolons.
So I always like to say, imagine in those comments that it's me saying it, like that I'm smiling like this while I'm saying it, because I think, especially when you've marked 60 of them, you can seem a bit terse just because you're so tired and you're just putting it down quickly in track changes or whatever. And you want to say, just imagine they're all smiley faces.
I say to students, look, it's never personal because I'm usually too tired to even know who I'm marking by the time I've done 50 papers or 120. So it's never personal, and it's usually tiredness talking rather than attitude. But if you have an issue, please email me so we can talk it through.
That's right. And the other thing to remember is that we've received many editorial complaints and corrections down the years in the course of our professional writing careers. I think I might have told this cohort about the edit I did of my book Twin Maker, which had each editing round had at least 300 comments in comment balloons on each draft, plus multiple sort of higher level kind of structural reports. You go through 3 rounds like that and it can be crushing, but that brutality strengthens you in a way. Yeah. So here's to brutality. So
there's the title for the episode, by the way. Here's to brutality.
Here's to brutality.
Here's to brutality. You guys, as well as having edited and been edited, you edit yourself constantly. Any tips or thoughts and challenges on that? I mean, that's one of the hardest things to do, is to edit your own work. And I can see it in my students in this class and other classes that when you've written an essay and you're polishing it, things just slip through perfectly naturally, just like they do for us.
Time's the answer to that. I beg students every year, because we can see if you can go onto Flow and you can see when things were submitted. And I'm like, it's due at 12 o'clock at night, and at 11:58 this file came in. You need to give yourself, I do this all the time, false deadlines. I'll pretend that something's due a week before it's actually due, so that I have a few days to go, okay, it's finished, go and do something else completely unrelated for a few days, go and have fun, then come back and read it with fresh eyes, and you will catch so much more than you will catch otherwise. So I think you need to have time, and you need to trick yourself. Well, I need to trick myself in order to give myself time. More and more, I think the major mistake that undergrads make is not giving themselves time. And I get it, they're working, they're doing other things, family issues, whatever may be happening. But so often I'm writing now, if you've just given yourself time for one more draft, you would have caught most of these things.
I agree with all of that. I also think I learned the most. So I'm quite polished now, and I really quite like editing my own work. But I think the most valuable thing I ever did was edit other people's work. Like marking has been, I've been doing it for almost 20 years now, and just the sheer volume of reading other people's work. And it's much easier to see the problems in other people's work, from big structural issues to clarity, down to just even copy editing. If you get practice on other people's work where you can see it clearly, suddenly you find you can do it in your own. And I think that's probably was the most valuable thing for me. And that started probably when I was in honours and I was editing some stuff. And then starting with marking, really, like the sheer volume of words that I've read in my life now. But even like it means that my first draft now is really polished because I know the problems before they're, I can read a paragraph and just go, oh, there's the problem there. There's no clarity there, or there's no hook, or there's no. So I think if you can, when you're a student, use the discussion boards to swap work. If you can meet people that you trust, I mean, that's another big thing. You don't want to just swap work with anyone. But if you do have a little cohort or a group of friends, or it can just be one person. I always had one friend. Now I have editors, I don't bother. But before I was published, my friend Chelsea and I used to swap work, and she's a great editor, like really good, and I learned to trust her. And then I would listen to her. That's the other trick, is when someone gives you feedback.
Yeah, exactly. There's only a few you listen to. It's so true. It's so true. You can claim otherwise, but it's so true. And I also think pride is part of that. Now, I've made major screw-ups in my time. I think I've told you both this, I replaced an owl with a magpie in a screenplay, but did it with find replace, which was stupid because a lot of words have OWL in them, like growl, and magpie makes no sense whatsoever. So I've had, major screw-ups like that. I did catch that one, I think, before it went out, but...
We've all been there. It's so terrible.
A lot of the time, I think it comes down to pride, though, because I would be so mortified if that went out to someone that I was trying to impress. And sometimes when I'm looking at student work, I'm thinking, like, there's an F-bomb that's just appeared in the middle of a sentence, which may have been your brother, your sister, or yourself, like, accidentally mixing up a chat with your essay. I don't know. There's things like that. I think you need to take a certain amount of, I don't want to look too silly. I think a little bit of that is probably healthy without being paranoid, because sometimes I look at things and go, oh man, come on, there's no way I should be reading a draft that says in brackets, fill more here, or,
We've all seen that. The other thing I would add to that too is being aware of what you don't know. Like never getting to, because I think, there are people who will be listening to this who know they're good at writing. Like they've always got good grades. It's something they do well. They're confident. You're like a natural athlete almost at writing. But you've always got to have this open mind that you don't know what you don't know. And so you may not know your formatting properly, or you may not know how to use a semicolon or a comma. And you always need to be open to learning and growing. And Sean could tell you this because he's published way more than either of us, but it doesn't matter how experienced you are. You get a real copy editor at your work and you realise what you don't know. Like, we're pretty good at grammar, but the copy editors who go through it with their dictionaries and you're just like, oh my God, okay, I don't know anything, and I need to just say, okay, sure.
And it's okay to admit that. I was telling everybody this week or last week that I will never get affect effect right in my head. I mess that up sometimes. So I look it up every time I use one, or I'll either look it up to make sure I've got it right, or I'll re-script the sentence just to avoid it completely. I'm so uncertain of it. And as you say, I've published a lot of books. It's
I can't spell bureaucracy, which I think is apt.
No, neither can I. I can never spell bureaucrat or bureaucracy. I can never spell it.
God, I've worked so hard at learning how to spell that word.
Or nausea. I can't spell nausea either.
Yeah, so here you go.
I can't spell bureaucracy well enough to get the computer to even know what I'm talking about.
That's fantastic. That's a serious, but actually that's a good point you raised there. Not just evidence of a serious problem, but I try to tell students not to use Word as a tool when it flags mistakes and punctuation errors, but don't rely on it completely, because it doesn't pick everything all the time.
No, and it's not always right.
No, this brings us to grammar and punctuation. I mean, how important is this really?
Very. I mean, I think if you've got a great story, people will sometimes give you the benefit, but you don't look very professional and you look like hard work. I think publishers look at you and they're like, okay, well, that's just going to be a lot of work. And if they've got the capacity to do the work, like if they're going, okay, well, I really need, I don't know, like a vampire baker novel right now, and this is a vampire baker, maybe I'll work on it.
It's an awesome idea, by the way.
But if it's like marginal and it just looks like, and they are a bit strapped for cash, publishers, and they may not want to spend the time developing you. I just think it's for me, I get a little bit cranky about it, because I think if you're a writer, they're your fundamental tools. It's a bit like calling a plumber because your toilet's leaking and he comes and goes, oh, I don't do toilets. It's like, you're a plumber. Yeah, you're a writer. That's a sentence. That's what you do.
Yeah, I agree. I was hesitant when I was first asked that question because I think it's about degrees. There are some really talented people where I go, okay, some of that sort of higher level grammar I can look through, but when people just look lazy, and a lot of the time it just, whether it's meant that way or not, and I acknowledge that some people are dyslexic or that some people just struggle with this stuff, whether it's meant that way or not, it will read as lazy. And if I've marked 50 papers and then I come up with another one where it has no apostrophes, I might get a little bit unfairly crazy about that. So it just reads as I don't care. And I think for that reason you are doing yourself a real disservice by not crossing your I's and crossing your T's and dotting your I's.
Well,
don't cross your I's.
And I do think in terms of the industry, like if you're sending out to publishers, there's probably a little frustration on their part on like, you know, you have to do the work to get to this level. Like you might want to hire someone to copy edit, or you might want to go for a manuscript assessment, or you might want to get a critique group, or there are various things you can do before you get to that level. Writers
SA runs grammar courses. And,
there's books, there's websites, there's so much out there now.
And if you're really bad at it, like if you try really hard and you just can't get your head around it, you might just have to bite the bullet and pay someone to do it. And I know that sounds, that is like you cannot get your head around this. You just can't see it. Then at least have the wherewithal to get someone else to help you with that. And in a student context, obviously you can't pay someone to rewrite your work, but you can go to the Student Learning Centre. You can spend time with a tutor. So if you hit the wall and you really honestly believe you cannot do it, I still think that's not an excuse for not getting it done, if that makes sense. It's like, I can't do any plumbing with the toilet, but that doesn't mean I just let the toilet
That's right.
do its thing.
That's right. You find the plumber.
You find the plumber. And I think sometimes it's like, okay, if you know that's your Achilles heel, you still have to get it done if you want to be taken seriously.
And we're really just talking about making sure the plumbing works. Like, it doesn't need to be gold-plated plumbing, right? There are people who are so brilliant at that polish, but we're talking about getting it just to acceptable standards so it's readable. I mean, I think that's what publishers want, and that's what we want. We know that people make mistakes.
The definition of readable is a really interesting one because a lot of people don't care about grammar when they're reading either. So for those people, it doesn't matter if all the commas are missing or the semicolons are abused. But when you're writing something or editing something, you want it to reach as wide an audience as possible. So you can't ignore the people that it will bother.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, and I think it's about just making sure that you have sentences. Like, that's the key thing. Like, when we're talking about grammar and punctuation, we're often used to reading things that don't actually even qualify as a sentence. And
my favourite ones. Here's my example. Shops are good if you want to buy. No, I like going to the shops are good if you want to buy groceries. So, in other words, it's a sentence that if you split it in half, you have the front half of a sentence and the back half of a sentence. But I like shops are good if you want to buy groceries is not a sentence. And I have that, whatever you call that, very often. And it almost feels like students begin the sentence, go and have a cup of coffee or have dinner, go for a walk, whatever, and then come back and just pick up from the word shops and keep going.
Or I think there's some cutting and pasting, right?
Cutting and pasting, yeah. Or you have such long paragraphs, there's not a single full stop. And I often write cheekily in the margin, reread it out loud. You're not allowed to take a breath till we hit a full stop. Good luck. And just see, if they survive, because it's a whole page. There might be comma, embedded clause, comma.
And just to reiterate, none of us knew any of this when we started out writing either. Like, this is every single person on the planet, because language is a construct and punctuation and grammar is a construct. We all had to learn it. So I learned it mostly from reading and didn't know what anything was called. But, it took some conscious effort to get commas and semicolons and stuff under control.
Yeah, I think you learn through reading, definitely. And if you're Dutch, apparently they don't use full stops very much.
Oh, crikey.
So if you're Dutch, it's okay, unless you're writing in English.
So speaking of learning this stuff, we have quite a few education students in this topic. So and they will be going on to be teachers at
primary. And karma will get you.
Yeah, karma so gets you. Karma will get you.
we've got that little gloating moment out of our system now. What can teachers do to help students learn this stuff? I mean, the first step is to know this stuff, but that's good because we've got proto teachers taking the subject, and that's excellent. And I'm sure they'll all go out to their further studies knowing more about semicolons at least. I was very lucky that I had a French teacher who taught me more about grammar than even my school teacher, Dad, Grammar Nazi, taught me. So having a good teacher who understands grammar and can teach it can make a huge difference. But I couldn't point my finger as to what he did except to terrify me. We don't want that.
Mine's probably a bit fluffier than technical, which is about growth mindset, is about, I think, some of us grew up with things like maths and, algebra, trigonometry, grammar, sometimes learning verbs in French or German or whatever, like those kinds of things where we were just kind of drilled in it and it was dry and boring and you felt stupid if you didn't get it. Like, I think that kind of teaching is why we hate grammar. Is to make it about the commas rather than the communication. Like, because I have a brain that switches off the minute anyone starts talking in dry language like mathematics. I can't do it. Like, I just can't do it.
I had one maths teacher who did make mathematics exciting, and I was terrible at maths. I failed business maths in high school epically, but I had one teacher who managed to make that creative in a way I could understand, and it was possibly because he used mathematics as a storytelling device, or he used storytelling as a device to teach mathematics. He made it somehow relevant. And so I think it's a similar thing with learning any kind of rule, any kind of axiom, is to kind of, and it also part of the skill of giving feedback, is to kind of disguise it in a way with narrative, I think, and to go, look, I'm not going to pick on the kind of details here. I'm going to help you to tell your story. And that means that we're going to give that story a sense of flow. And that means in a de facto way, we are going to have to acknowledge grammatical issues. So I don't know, is it by dwelling on the macro rather than the micro?
I think it's probably a combination of making the logic clear. Here's what it is and here's why you use it.
Yes.
And then putting it in action rather than treating it as like, let's all write up semicolons on the... I had to teach academic English once at another institution for summer school every year, and it was so bad. And it was literally standing up at the whiteboard, putting commas in sentences. And I remember thinking, because they gave us the lesson plan and it was like, here, you have to do this. And I just remember thinking, this is dire. Like, even I can barely learn it and I'm teaching it. So I think I learned through doing much more. So I think if the logic is clear, like, this is what a semicolon is and why, and then you have to practice using it, that's way more fun than just putting it up on a whiteboard. A
rule in isolation. It's like any kind of learning. When you have to put it into practice, it's relevant, you learn it. When it's just a rule and you don't know why you're learning it, then it's difficult.
I've certainly tried to do that this semester. It's very hard though, but one thing I won't do is, or will actively try to avoid, is using all the jargon that goes along with grammar.
Adjectival
clauses.
All of that, it just, that does sound like mathematics. It's like when I was a kid, I remember my mother trying to teach me the road rules prior to even me being within a whisper of getting a license, like when I was like 11.
25.
I don't care about the road. Well, what was that?
This is last summer.
Last summer. I've been watching these dash cam videos. I'm obsessed with cars at the moment. But, when I'm 11, the road rules mean nothing to me. Yeah. But when you're 15, 16, it's like, okay, now I want to know, because now I'm actually going to get in the car. And I think it's important as a student to have the mindset that it's not just an exercise you've been given by a lecturer. This is part of your journey towards doing what you want to do. So make it relevant for yourself and make it, like you're driving the car, not just learning the rules. Does that make any sense? Or is that a weird metaphor?
Like driving a car, it has consequences, right? So you can,
serious ones. Watch dash
you can kill people, right, with a car, and you may not think you can kill people with a comma, but if you take law, where you put a possessive apostrophe or a comma has massive real world impacts. And same with things if you work in government, or even when we design your learning outcomes and assessments and SAMs, all of that stuff has a real world impact. So I think, it's that applicability.
Well, there's a big difference between saying, let's eat, grandma, and let's eat grandma. That can go badly wrong.
That's what happened to grandma, damn it.
That's what happened to grandma.
Poor grandma. And some of the students might end up writing instruction manuals, and we've all struggled with badly written instruction
Bloody
manuals.
IKEA.
So we're coming towards the end of our time. I've got 2 quick grammatical questions.
Is this like a quiz where you ask us a grammar question and then we both get it wrong and look like idiots?
Correct.
Yes.
Semicolons. What are your opinions on semicolons?
Oh, I know this because my students have been talking to me about you, Sean.
I bet they have.
It's a trap. I am not as opposed to them as my learned colleague here. I think they can be horribly overused. And in fact, I've co-written academic articles where even I've gone, oh man, that's way too many semicolons. I think they can be horribly overused, but I wouldn't necessarily shy away from using one if it has the effect I want it to have and if it makes sense within that sentence. So I wouldn't do it often, but I'd still do it.
That's good advice.
I do really like them, but I think, again, it's all about effect, like you said. So Virginia Woolf uses them a lot, but in terms of water imagery and a sense of rushing sensation and of moments of being and of time, and so it has an effect. Same when you're listing, it has an effect. But I think most of the time people use them, they actually mean to use a full stop or a comma or a colon. Like they're just misusing them.
Or a dash or a... Yeah, and that'll help.
Yeah, dashes are fun, yeah. I often stop and think about it.
Yeah. No. But stop and thinking is always a good idea. And I think a lot of people read semicolons as having a particular effect that they don't really have. Like I think just like I used to think when I was a teenager of how it looks on the page. It looks like I know my grammar really well. It looks like I'm J.R.R. Tolkien. But most of the time I was using it completely wrong and it just made me look like an idiot. And that's why I advise students not to... No, it doesn't make people look like an idiot. It makes people look like they don't know what they're doing. Yeah. And that's why I advise students to just not use them.
It's a very specific grammatical tool. Like it means something very specific.
Do you find that they happen more in academic writing? I have noticed that in a lot of academic writing they are quite prevalent. Usually
Can I say something relatively unpopular, but I really believe deeply? I think that most academic writing is bad writing. I think it's actually not well written.
I think that most academic writing is overwritten.
Yes.
In a flowery sense, in a purple prose sense.
I think by trying to adopt a position of authority, it's not often very well written. And the other thing I think is most academics are experts in a field, not experts in writing.
Yes.
Agreed.
And so all of them could benefit from some clarity, succinctness, and better grammar.
I think clarity and concision are the 2 big things that the 2 words that I use most often, I think, in feedback from the first assignment for this subject. And that's really good advice for students to remember going into their larger essay, that writing and it critically and academically does not mean overriding. It does not mean being confusing.
And I think because the first rule of all writing is communication, and you all would have, in your reading list students, you would be looking at extended texts and secondary readings where you're like, I just don't understand what they're saying. Yes. I've read it like
the
3
architect
times.
from the Matrix is talking to you and you go, just give me a coherent sentence.
Yeah. So I think so often then it's not you, it's the text. And a lot of theory, for example, is translated from French or from German or from something else, Russian, and the translations just aren't great translations.
So here's another quick grammatical yes-no, the Oxford comma.
Oh,
I love the Oxford comma. I like it. I like the Oxford comma.
I converted to the Oxford comma. I was dead against it. I was just... Actually, an ex-girlfriend of mine went, embrace the Oxford comma. I went, ooh, let's spice up our relationship and embrace the Oxford comma. No, I'm a recent convert to the Oxford comma. I love it now. Used to loathe it. Used to hate it.
But I do find Australian publishing and US publishing are different on commas.
Yes,
they use commas differently. So,
yes.
Sean, do you like them or do you not?
I do like them.
Good. See, we're all on the same page. Word docs for the win.
I think it's a bit like semicolons in that sometimes you need one and sometimes it actually, a sentence or a phrase or the communication might be more efficient if you don't have it. And it's a matter of knowing that you can go either way. And
can you go either way? Okay, that's a good one. Good. Because I've been finding in the same piece of work, and I've been very self-critical about this, in the same piece of work, sometimes I'm using them and sometimes I'm not, which is inconsistent.
That's fine.
No, it's fine because it's all like Sean said. It comes down to what is the sentence trying to communicate, and you always want to put your grammar in the way that gets the communication the clearest.
Yeah, very good. Because I've been worried about that.
But you will hit a proofreader who will either take them all out or put them all back in or whatever. So you've got to be prepared to fight that battle if you're going to be inconsistent.
And when they send you the style guide, and you're like, "Oh, that's not at all how I do it." You're like, "This is going to be a long edit of a lot of accept change, change."
Well, it's been a great experiment doing our very first Word Docs Live podcast.
Please give us feedback on how we did live.
Only if it's nice.
I know Alex and I struggled not.
I made one comment that I already regret, but that's okay.
Well, usually it's more than that, so it's
true.
fine.
But if you are interested in knowing what kind of comments get taken out in the editorial process, we do have a very special Halloween/Amy's birthday outtakes episode. It is entirely outtakes, and you will hear just how inept and unprofessional we are. And I find that very reassuring sometimes. If I'd known just how fallible my heroes were when I was growing up reading, the books of people I loved, it would have made me feel a lot more confident moving forward.
And we will one day learn how fallible heroes are, because one day we'll get around to talking about heroes instead of saying we're going to do it and never doing it.
Well, thank you both. I'll see you again soon. Bye.
See ya. Bye.
Why don't you write when you don't need money? All your notes sound alike too much. All of them start with I love you, honey, but they end with the same old touch. Just for a change, send a nice loving letter and cut out that please remittance. Why don't you write when you don't need money, honey? That would certainly make a hit.
Writer of short stories, publishing in the Australian context. That was a car outside my house. This is live.
I was waiting for the crash.
Usually it's Alex's house. But
Yeah, I'm constantly looking at this window because any minute now, someone's trying to park right now and I don't trust them.
There may be a crash. Be careful.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.